Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma or those who've experienced violence and have conversations about social issues. This week, we are talking about music therapy. My name is Emilie Mitchell, and I am the Education Coordinator at the Victim Service Center. With me today, I have Charniqua Snell. Charniqua is a board-certified music therapist and a student at Rollins College in the Masters of Mental Health Counseling program. Charniqua has been able to work with clients of various ages and abilities and has a passion for using music to promote healing. Charniqua, thank you so much for being here today.
Of course, thank you for having me.
I also have with me Stephen Wilson. Stephen was a crisis counselor victim advocate intern at the Victim Service Center and has recently completed his master's in social work. He is dedicated to helping our community heal through the empowerment and expression of their unique life experiences. Thank you, Stephen, as well, for being here as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
And once again, congratulations on your graduation as well.
Thank you.
As a very brief introduction, music is sometimes used within a therapeutic relationship to address physical, emotional, cognitive, and social needs of individuals. What we are looking to explore in this episode is how music is used in therapy for healing, and if we can, specifically for survivors of trauma. With that in mind, I wanted to start off to see how would you both describe music therapy in your own words? If you'd like to start, Charniqua.
Okay. So for me, music therapy is a way, it's a clinical and evidence-based treatment to help people of any age and really of any culture to achieve certain goals. And like you said, those goals can be physical, they can be emotional, social, cognitive, and you can use music therapy in an individual setting and also in group settings. And it's a non-threatening way of allowing people to explore those emotions and those thoughts so that they can start on their journey of healing for whatever it may be.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Stephen, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
In my experience, music therapy is the ways in which we connect and identify and express the emotions and experiences through the expression of the arts.
Oh, absolutely. And I did hear a great word. I heard non-threatening. So could you go a little more into that, Charniqua, of how music can be kind of non-threatening and what that exactly means in like the therapeutic sense?
Yeah. So for some people, going to therapy and talking about emotions and thoughts, especially when it's linked with trauma, can be threatening. It can be scary, especially if they've never been in therapy before. They might not know what to expect. But with music is a human phenomenon that's in every culture, really, whether it's singing, whether it's playing instruments. And so bringing in something that they already know and they're already familiar with and they already have a connection with, and then merging that with some of the harder things that they'll have to talk about and feel makes it a little less threatening. And it's also, I found a good way to have a rapport with the client, bringing in music, asking them what music they love, using the music that they prefer is always best to establish that connection with them so they feel more comfortable with you and more comfortable with the process.
Absolutely. That makes complete sense. And I know from a therapeutic standpoint, building rapport with the client is very important. So thank you for sharing that. I'd also like to move on and ask how you both use music in your personal lives.
I'm someone who really enjoys life living through my senses. So music is often an expression of my current state of mind or a feeling that I'm wanting to evoke. Depending on the task or what I'm doing, I often have music in the background to, support my emotional well-being, however I may be feeling at that time.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Charniqua, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, actually, I agree with Stephen. I do that too, trying to find music that matches my mood and having that playing around me. I also play different instruments, and so being able to express myself and sometimes even calm myself down if I'm feeling anxious or upset, being able to play music how I'm feeling is helpful for me.
How beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. I also kind of wanted to lead into that with what drew you both to music within therapy. If you'd like to start off, Charniqua.
Yeah, so I actually didn't know it was even a thing until my senior year of high school. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to go to college for, really, and I was thinking about nursing or psychology, but my junior year of high school, I started loving music more and taking my lessons more seriously and things like that. So I thought maybe I would minor in music or do something fun with it on the side. And then I found that music therapy was actually a major, and it seemed to combine two things that I really love, which is music and also being able to have a career that I can help people with. So that's what drew me to doing music therapy and studying it and being able to use it with other people to combine those two things.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all that you do and also for sharing that with us. That's wonderful. I didn't know that you wanted to originally go into music, and you said that you play instruments. So what were those instruments?
At the time, it was violin. If I'm being honest, I haven't picked up the violin in a while. College kind of burnt me out on the violin. I still have it, but I just haven't played it in a while. Now it's mostly guitar, and then I can play keyboard a little bit and singing.
Amazing. And do you happen to play while you? We'll probably go more into exactly how you integrate, music within your therapeutic sessions. But I was wondering, kind of curious, do you happen to play in your sessions, or do you play music in a different way?
Yes, both.
Okay.
So yeah, playing live, having instruments and singing, however that might be. I mean, there's different thoughts on it, but for me, I was taught that that's always the best. And I agree with it most of the time, because if you're playing music yourself, you're able to adapt it to the situation and to the person. So if you need to go slower, if you need to go faster, if you need to make it louder, maybe change the words or stop singing to ask them a question. And that's harder to do if you're using recorded music. But there are times when using recorded music is helpful also. So both.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's so interesting. I love that. And it makes complete sense. Stephen, I know that your background, you've worked with music a little bit in your therapy, but I wanted to ask you specifically, what drew you to use music within therapy?
To externalize the problem, essentially, music was a mode of finding, like selecting that issue and externalizing the problem and separating it from the self, right? So if you can take that thought, idea, or emotion and kind of segregate it to that song, express it, and allow yourself to process that, it externalizes it and allows you to basically separate the issue from the self and know that your trauma does not define you, that it's just a portion of something that has happened.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to also ask, are there any misconceptions about music therapy that you would like to address? And we could start with Charniqua.
I think the biggest one that I run into, people will say that like, oh, I'm not musical, I can't sing, or they get nervous thinking that they'll have to perform with me, or so that's one end of it, or they will think it's just me singing to them to make them feel better, and both of those, it's not that they're wrong, but that's not really the goal. How I see it is kind of like what Stephen said, is it's a collaborative way. It's a way for them to use the music to deal with it, whatever they're dealing with. So it's not really helpful for me to just sing to them. And it's also not a music lesson. It's I want them to be able to dive in and really experience whatever the activity or intervention is with the music, so that they can come out of it understanding themselves more and understanding their situation more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. Stephen, do you have anything you would like to add? I know you went in a little bit with it, but were there any other misconceptions about music therapy that you found that you'd like to address?
Just that it's not limited to classical music. There's a lot of research that, classical music promotes well-being and things like that, and it's very true. But any genre can be used for music therapy. It's all about a perception and expression, in my opinion.
Yeah, and let's go into that a little bit. What genres do you tend to go towards and use within your sessions?
Yeah, so I 100% agree. I forgot about that misconception. It's not just because I've gotten that too. They're like, oh, well, I don't like classical music or opera. And it's like, well, I can't really play that well anyway, so that's not what we're going to do. It's about whatever they like. So like I've worked with kids, and I've had kids and adolescents. So I've had teenagers who they're into like death metal and screamo, and I was incorporated that in some way, even though that's not what I listen to on a daily basis. So it's what they like, and sometimes you have to get creative, especially if maybe the music they like has maybe inappropriate words or themes. It doesn't mean that you can't use it. Maybe there's a conversation there that can be had that relates to what they're in therapy for. But yeah, it's whatever genre the client connects with, because the more they connect with it, the more you'll get out of the session.
I agree, Shaniqua. It requires a buy-in, right? And they're an investment. And so if they have value and the meaning and the lyrics and everything, there's a certain value and investment into it. And I find it to be a productive session when they choose the recording.
That is really cool. Do you find that I wanted to also talk about not the meaning behind the lyrics? Is that what's helpful within these sessions? Is it just listening to the music itself? Is it a combination of both?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. It really depends on for me, it depends on what the goal is, what we're working for. So let's say we are talking about coping skills, maybe ways that they can cope with their situation. So maybe using lyrics, finding a song that or a genre of music that they like, and picking a song with lyrics that talk about going through a hard time, and looking at the lyrics and seeing if there's anything that they connect with or anything that they disagree with, and how would they apply those lyrics to their life and how would they not. It's a way to get them thinking about their situation by using someone else's words, especially if they can't verbalize it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I could use lyrics, or maybe you're trying to promote relaxation, and so maybe that's a time when you are just only listening. There's no talking, there's no whatever. You're trying to promote relaxation, and you're maybe using progressive muscle relaxation with the music, and tensing their body and then relaxing it, and then using music with that in some way, or using guided imagery with music. And so really it just looks like they're sitting there, but they're still using that music as a way to relax themselves. So it just depends on what they're there for and what they want to work on. And then that decides how you would use the music.
Charniqua, are there proper terms? Because you kind of pointed out two different ideas, right? Where one's like interactive and you're processing the song and you're dissecting the lyrics, and then the other one's more of like a passive way where, you're just getting the feelings of the music rather than processing the music. Are there two different terms for that, or is it just?
Well, there are different terms of like different interventions that are used, but yeah, there are more active ways, and then there's more passive ways of using music in therapy, for music therapy. There's different interventions. Like I mentioned, there's the guided imagery with the music. So that would be like a specific intervention that you could take classes on and learn. And then using the lyrics, I call it lyric analysis. That's how I learned to term it. And yeah, taking a song, looking at the lyrics, analyzing them like the title says, and seeing how it relates to the person and their situation. And then there's other types of interventions and terms that are used, but usually it's active where they're participating more, or a passive way, if you wanted to break it down simply. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Stephen, was there anything else you wanted to add about using lyrics versus, using both the lyrics and just the emote that comes through listening to the instruments and parts of that that you wanted to add?
Well, one thing that I've noticed with the client I did music therapy with was that the suppressed emotions are sometimes either conscious or unconscious, and the music often is a means of allowing that person to express that emotion and identify with that emotion, and it proved very beneficial in the past.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. And it kind of leads me to my other question of, we've been talking a lot about, kind of what, music therapy is, and but could you, Charniqua, will start off, if you could walk us through specifically how you use music therapy in a session, if you could share a specific example of how you do it.
Okay. I think it's similar to how maybe Stephen would do a session. I don't know, he can listen to me and say if it's different. But there's an assessment part of it. So meeting the person for the first time, getting background information, and that includes their musical past. So have they ever had any lessons before? What music do they like? Do they like to sing? Do they like to move to music? Because sometimes we use movement. We're not dance therapists, but I'm not a dance therapist, but there's still ways to incorporate movement with it. Figuring out whatever their abilities or disabilities may be, because we may have to adapt it. So yeah, there's an assessment part to learn more about them. And then based on that assessment, after that initial assessment, we figure out the goals and making it as collaborative as possible. So going to the client, or if it's a child, to the client and the caregiver and saying, this is what I saw, and the last couple of sessions, and based on what you told me and what I saw, these are some goals and objectives that I think would be helpful, and this is how I can use music to help you achieve those goals, and seeing what they think about it, and having some sort of agreement on it, and then using those goals to guide whatever music we use and whatever activities we use in later sessions. That's kind of a general way of describing it. Yeah, and then tracking the goals to make sure that we're on the same page and that we're moving in the right direction, and changing and adapting the goals if need be until those goals are reached and they feel like they've made some improvement. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it sounds like sometimes the client might not be interested in participating in the music. Do you find that as the case, as they just want to be an active listener in that sense?
Usually no. Once I explain that, like, this isn't lessons, there won't be any, recital or anything. Right. This is just, this is kind of a fun, like I said earlier, non-threatening way of getting you to achieve whatever goals you're looking for. So when it's explained that way, and it's like, there's no recording, no one's going to see you, it's just me and you, or me, you and mom, or whoever in this room, then that changes a little bit, and it's not as scary. And usually people want to interact. That's what I've seen in my experience. The only time where there isn't much interaction is if they have a disease or a condition where they're pretty low functioning. And so then at that point, maybe it's just me doing most of the musical work, and they're in a more passive role.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Stephen, did you have anything to add about, sharing a specific example of how you use music therapy in a session? I think we went over it a little bit, but I just wanted to see if you had anything else you'd like to add.
So as a music therapist, Charniqua has a much more clinical approach to sessions. But essentially, I gave it to a client as homework, asking her to find a couple songs that she identified with, because she was having a lot of trouble expressing any emotion. And she simply brought it in, and we listened to the song together without just the audio, no video. And at any point, she was able to stop the song and, identify with the lyric or the verse that was going on. And this particular case, the gentleman was talking about, feeling guilty for the things that he had done. And the client wanted, her perpetrator to feel guilty. And it was the first time she was able to have that breakthrough and acknowledge the fact that someone had wronged her. And it really set the stage for a lot of work we did together. And it was just really impactful in that session.
Wow, it sounds like it was a really great way to kind of connect with her. That sounds really powerful. That actually leads to my other question is, how do you think music therapy specifically helps, survivors of sexual assault or, violence in their healing process? And I think we could start with you, Stephen, and to kind of learn more about that.
Well, I kind of touched on it earlier, where trauma is often suppressed, right? It's suppressed and oppressed. We don't want to think about it. We don't want it on the forefront of our minds, so we bury it deep down. And once it's buried deep down, it often surges back up, whether or not we know what it's stemming from. And music, whether it be conscious or unconscious, allows us to identify with those feelings, memories, and thoughts, and allow us to process and move past it in a healthy and healing manner.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. And I know, Charniqua, that you may not have worked specifically using music therapy with survivors of trauma, but with your experience and knowledge of music therapy in general, how do you think it would help those who have experienced trauma through healing?
I think Stephen is 100% correct. Using music to bring up those emotions that don't want to be looked at, or maybe, like he said, they're suppressed and they're unconscious, because music stimulates the whole brain, and music can be a very emotional tool that can elicit memories. One of the ways when I'm describing music therapy to people, I tell them to think of like their wedding song, or a song that their grandma sang to them when they were younger, and usually they can immediately think of it. And it's not just the song and it's not just the memory, but it's also what they were feeling in that moment, how they felt. Did they feel safe? Did they feel loved? And they're not consciously bringing that up. It's just that music is tied to those emotions so tightly. And so to be able to use music in a therapeutic way, especially when those emotions are scary and threatening, but to get to healing, you need to deal with those emotions. Music is very powerful and can be very powerful for the client and for anyone really to start working on that.
You bring up a very good point. It's not only music's not only a great intervention, but it's a great coping mechanism, right?
Yes.
So when we hear that song, it brings up all those wonderful good feelings of childhood or whatever memory is associated. So it just brings up a really good point that music's not only a great intervention, but a great coping mechanism as well, especially when dealing with trauma.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. That's exactly what I was thinking too. That resonated with me, where music is a coping mechanism, like you were mentioning, that people can use it in their daily lives outside of a therapy session to just connect with their own emotions and kind of know that, hey, I'm not the only one who's kind of going through this right now, which I think is really powerful too. I also wanted to ask, do you think music therapy is helpful for all of your clients? Or do you think that there are some clients that maybe music therapy would not work for?
Yeah, I'm a little biased. I wish it could help. I wish I could be like, oh, no, it's perfect for everybody. But like, no, it's not. Just like any other therapy. There's, like I said, it's a newer therapy, and there's a lot of evidence, and a lot of research out there that shows how helpful it is, but not everyone is going to connect with it in a powerful way or in a therapeutic way. So during that, assessment process, or when you're first meeting the client, and asking them questions of how they interact with music is important, because maybe they aren't a good fit. Or maybe, or even maybe they are a good fit, but making sure that there isn't music or genres that are triggering for them, because that can be harmful and scare them away from the therapy process and bring harm. So in both ways, either they're not a fit, or making sure that the music you use is appropriate for them so that it's helpful.
Absolutely. I didn't even think about how certain genres could be triggering, especially with survivors of trauma. I'm sure that there are those who have specific memories, maybe with music, that I didn't even think about. So that's a really important part of the therapeutic process, is having that discussion at the beginning. Right. Stephen, do you have anything you'd like to add about maybe, do you think if music therapy would be helpful for all of your clients?
I think on a certain level, yes. And like Charniqua, I'm a bit biased myself because I do really enjoy music. But it goes back to the buy-in, right? Do you value music? How much value do you put in music for your own emotional and physical health? Is it something that you believe in as a healing process? Everyone can enjoy music. You don't have to understand all of the instruments in the symphony to enjoy the complex and dramatic music that's presented, right? It's just a matter of how much you identify with it and how you perceive it, in my opinion.
Yeah, it seems like a really, it's kind of interesting, because it feels like it's a very individual experience, very individualized. I remember you saying, Charniqua, that it depends on what music the client likes, and that determines how you would move forward with using music in therapy. But it also seems to bring people together at the same time, which I find really interesting. Do you think that the clients or you both have to be musically inclined to use music in therapy?
Well, I think client-wise, not really. I think the therapist who's using music on some level needs to be comfortable with it, because they're the ones who's presenting it to the client, and they have to at least know what they're going to do with the music and be able to explain, if there's questions, how it's going to be helpful. So on the therapist end of it, on some level, yes, you have to be comfortable with it. Yeah. Especially if you want to like sing or play instruments, then yeah, you have to sound good. Otherwise, it's not going to be beneficial to anybody. So, yes, but for the client, like Stephen was saying, you don't have to have gone to school for music or had lessons or, been around it or your whole life. As long as there is some connection and you're willing to try it, then it's on the therapist end to adapt it and make it a successful situation for them so that they can find meaning and healing out of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Just a side note, music therapy was introduced to me when I was having trouble having a breakthrough with a client. And I collaborated with some colleagues, and, because this particular individual was a team, they said, try music therapy. So, they gave me some great ideas. And because of that collaboration with other mental health providers, I was able to have that breakthrough with a client, and now am able to incorporate a little bit of music therapy into my sessions when it is helpful.
That's wonderful. I love that. In addition to music therapy, what other types of therapy do you tend to use to pair it with music?
Like I said earlier, I live very much through my sensories, or my senses. So I'm very much a visual person as well. I like to have the sound of water in the room, like a fish tank, things to look very calm and appealing to assist in the music with the therapeutic session. I think it creates an environment that's very welcome and calming.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Charniqua, what other types of therapy do you use to pair with music therapy?
I use a little bit of movement with the music. I found that it can be very grounding. Hearing movement, especially like at the beginning or the end, using it as a way to be like, okay, we're back, we're here in the present, and getting in touch with where our bodies are right now. So using movement in that way. I am in school to be a counselor, a mental health counselor. So using, hopefully in the future, being at Stephen's level and be able to use my words and my reflection and being able to use that more in sessions, I would be very helpful to help process those feelings and those emotions more.
Wonderful. Yeah, it sounds like you use a lot of like mindfulness exercises to bring people back into the present. That's amazing. Thank you so much. Before we sign off here, I'd like to ask both of you if there's anything else that you'd like to add about music therapy or your experience with the Victim Service Center, anything like that.
Yeah, for the last thing, if there's any one thing someone can take away from this podcast, is that music can be very powerful. And you don't have to have a strong background in music for music therapy to be helpful for you. So whether your counselor is using music like Stephen has done, or if you seek out a music therapist, it can be a powerful way to help your journey of healing through trauma. And I just hope that this conversation has been helpful to someone and empowering for someone, for them to use music and the arts to help themselves.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Stephen, is there anything else you would like to add?
Just find your own journey of healing. If it's with music, if it's, through whatever other coping mechanisms you may have, find what works for you. Because once you find what works for you, you'll be able to work through a plethora of problems in the present and in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a great way to kind of sign off here. So thank you for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone. Thank you, Stephen and Charniqua, so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you.